What if the person you least expect changed your life completely? Victor, a cold and lonely millionaire, hired Clara just to clean his mansion. But he never imagined that this simple, spontaneous woman would do something that no amount of money could buy: bring a smile back to his son's face. What began as a simple job soon turned into a clash of realities, where rules were broken, truths came to light, and a hardened heart was forced to change. But when Victor makes a mistake that could cost him everything, will he realize it before it's too late? Stay until the end, because this story may surprise you in ways you never imagined. Come on, Theo. If we miss this bus, my chance of getting a job goes with it. Clara pulled her son by the hand as they ran down the sidewalk. The 7-year-old tried to keep up with his mother, but his short legs made it difficult. "Mum, if we run faster, can we travel back in time?" he asked, panting. "I don't know, son, but if I don't get this job, we'll have to learn to live on light and good intentions." She spotted the bus about to leave the stop. With one last effort, she pulled Theo and they both jumped on at the last second. The door closed behind them with a metallic clang. "We made it!" Theo cheered, raising his arms as if he had just won a marathon. Clara laughed, ruffling her son's hair. At least a little lightness before what could have been a disaster. Half an hour later, Clara pulled up in front of the mansion. The iron gate looked taller than any building she had ever seen. "All right, Theo, behave yourself. This is no joke." He nodded with a solemn air, but the curious gleam in his eyes gave away his desire to explore. The housekeeper, a serious-looking woman called Marta, welcomed them. "Mr. Victor will see you now," she said without much emotion. Clara took a deep breath and followed her into the house. The marble floor shone so brightly that she could see her own reflection. "I swear, if we slip here, we'll slide all the way out," Theo whispered. Clara hid a smile. They crossed a long corridor to an office where a man stood with his back turned, looking out of the window. Tall, wearing an impeccable suit, he seemed to be carved from the marble of the house itself. "Mr. Victor, this is Clara." The man turned around, revealing sharp eyes and an impassive expression. "Are you the candidate for the job?" he asked bluntly. "That's right," Clara replied, keeping her tone firm. "Do you have any experience?" "If cleaning rich people's houses is different from cleaning poor people's houses, then maybe I don't," she said with a smile. Victor arched an eyebrow, clearly not used to direct answers. "I don't tolerate distractions or disorganization. Do you follow rules?" "As long as they make sense, yes." Marta's eyes widened. Theo, standing next to his mother, watched the scene as if he were seeing a duel. Victor sighed, picking up a folder from the table. "All right, Clara made a quick move to put her bag back and accidentally bumped into the table. Victor's untouched coffee toppled over, spilling onto the papers. The silence was instantaneous. "Great start," muttered Victor, grabbing a tissue to clean up the mess. Clara closed her eyes for a second, holding back the urge to disappear into thin air. "Sir, can I, Marta, get another copy of the documents?" Marta hurried off, while Clara tried to clear the table with a napkin. "Well, if you needed a striking way to start, you got it," Victor said, looking down at his stained shirt. Theo innocently added, "My mother is very good at cleaning up messes, sir. Would you like her to start with your shirt?" Clara widened her eyes at her son, but to her surprise, Victor let out a low laugh. She held her breath. Had he just laughed? "Marta, bring a contract," Victor said when the housekeeper returned. "Sir? I've had worse coffee than that. She's hired." Clara blinked in surprise. Was that a compliment? "Don't get used to it. Start tomorrow." She left the office, holding Theo by the hand, her heart racing. "Mom, does this mean we're going to have food other than instant noodles this week?" Clara laughed. "I think so, son. I think so." The next morning, Clara arrived at the mansion on time. She was dressed in simple but neat clothes and had a determined look on her face. It was her first day on the job, and she was ready to impress, or at least avoid another coffee disaster. Marta greeted her at the door with the same neutral expression as before. "Your tasks are listed in the kitchen. Mr. Victor prefers his staff to be discreet and quiet." Clara arched an eyebrow. "He knows you hire humans, right?" Marta didn't react. She made her way to the kitchen, where she found an extensive to-do list. As she looked through the paper, she felt a gaze on her. Turning around, she caught sight of a little brown-haired boy peeking at her from the hallway. He didn't run away this time. He just stared at her with a curious expression. "You must be Leo." The boy hesitated before nodding. "I'm Clara. I'm going to work here now." Silence. Clara noticed that he was holding a toy car and had an idea. She took a cloth and pretended it was a tunnel. "I bet your cart is fast. Can you get through this tunnel before it closes?" Leo frowned, analyzing the proposal. Then slowly he placed the trolley on the ground and pushed it through the cloth. Clara closed the cloth as soon as she was through, feigning great relief. "Whew! That was close." Leo blinked a few times and, to her surprise, smiled. Again. Clara repeated the game, and with each round Leo's smile grew a little wider. But then a sharp voice echoed down the corridor. "What's going on here?" Victor appeared in the doorway with his usual closed expression. Clara stood up quickly. You should be cleaning up, not playing games." Clara crossed her arms. "I can do both, you know. I'm a multitasker." Victor sighed. "Leo, go to your room." The boy hesitated before leaving, but Clara noticed something new. He looked at her as if he didn't want to go. When they were alone, Victor approached. "I don't want any distractions. You're here to work, not to entertain my son." Clara raised her hands, ironic. "Right, boss. What about you? Are you here to live or just to pay bills?" Victor blinked, stunned by the answer. What? Never mind. I'm going back to work." She picked up the cloth and left, leaving a speechless Victor behind. As she finished her chores, Clara couldn't forget Leo's gaze. That boy needed attention, affection. And it seemed his father needed an instruction manual on how to raise children. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going to ignore Leo, even if she had to defy the world's grumpiest boss. As Clara reflected on how small actions could change someone's life, she realized that sometimes the answer we need is right in front of us. All we have to do is take the first step. Just as a simple job began to transform her life and Leo's, you too can initiate change now. Want to find out how? In the fixed comment, you'll find an exclusive ebook that can transform your life in ways you never imagined. Click on the link and start your journey now. The next morning, Clara arrived at the mansion already prepared for a possible sermon. She knew that Victor didn't like her closeness to Leo, but if he thought that a frown was going to make her back down, he was sorely mistaken. As soon as she entered, she found the boy sitting on the stairs, absent-mindedly playing with the baby carriage they had used the day before. "Hey, champ, is the mission to take this cart around the world or just to the mansion?" Clara joked as she straightened her apron. Leo smiled and motioned for her to come closer. "Would you like to see a trick?" "Always." The boy held the cart, lifted the improvised track a little with a book, and let go. The toy slid quickly across the marble floor, ending up right in front of a pair of expensive, polished shoes. "Victor." "Interesting," he said, picking up the stroller and handing it back to his son. "But maybe you should play in your room." Leo bowed his head, picked up the toy, and went upstairs without saying anything. Clara watched, crossing her arms. "You know he's not a mini-executive, right? He's a child." Victor sighed. "He has everything he needs." "Does he? Because honestly, the only thing this house has too much of is echo." Victor massaged his temples, clearly not in the mood for philosophical discussions about fatherhood before 8 in the morning. I didn't hire you to give opinions. Clara smiled sideways. But you did hire a cleaner who talks. I came with this defect from the factory. Before he could reply, Marta appeared in the corridor, interrupting the discussion. Sir, your meeting is in 15 minutes. Victor nodded, casting one last warning glance at Clara before leaving. She sighed and went back to work, but the scene wouldn't leave her mind. Leo was visibly lacking in attention, and his father, well, Victor seemed great at writing checks, but terrible at realizing that money didn't make a home. Later, while cleaning the library, she felt a pair of little eyes watching her from the corner of the room. Did the boss let you talk to me, or am I still on the banned list? She joked, winking at Leo. He laughed softly and entered the room. My father doesn't like mess. Clara knelt down so that she was at his height. But playing isn't messy. I bet he had a lot of fun when he was a kid. Leo thought for a moment. I don't know. I think he was born serious. Clara laughed. That would explain a lot. Leo took one of the children's books from the shelf and held it hesitantly. Can you read stories? Of course. Would you like me to read you one? He nodded quickly and sat down on the carpet. Clara took the book and started narrating in funny voices for each character. Leo laughed, covering his mouth so as not to make too much noise. This is how Victor found them when he entered the library. What exactly is going on here? Clara looked up and smiled. We're practicing the ancient art of dramatic reading. Would you like to take part? Victor crossed his arms. You really have trouble following rules, don't you? Clara shrugged. I don't like silly rules. Victor arched an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the direct answer. Leo, sensing the tension, grabbed his mother's arm and looked at his father. Dad, have you ever read a story like that? Victor opened his mouth but then closed it, as if he didn't know what to say. Clara smiled. I bet you haven't, but it's never too late to start. Victor gave them both a long look before letting out a sigh. Leo, it's late. Time for dinner. The boy nodded and ran into the kitchen. When they were alone, Victor looked at Clara with a mixture of frustration and curiosity. You're stubborn, and you need to smile more. He squinted at her, but instead of fighting, he just shook his head and left. Clara watched him leave, satisfied. After all, for the first time, Victor hadn't told her to shut up. That was progress. The next day, Clara arrived at the mansion with a strange feeling. Something told her that the crabby boss was going to try to put an end to the little progress she and Leo had made, and to her complete lack of surprise, she was right. As soon as she entered, Marta took her aside with the same expression as always. Mr. Victor wants to see you in his office. Wow, so early. Did he dream about me and wake up angry? Marta didn't answer. Clara took a deep breath and went into the office, finding Victor behind the mahogany desk, like a king about to expel a rebellious subject. Good morning, boss. If this is a warning not to laugh in the house, I'll tell you that I'm terrible at following absurd orders. Victor crossed his arms. I told you I didn't want any distractions, but every time I see you, you're playing with my son. Clara raised an eyebrow. It's funny how you say that like it's a bad thing. My son doesn't need distractions. Oh, yes, he does. And he also needs a father. Victor was visibly annoyed by this answer. I work to make sure he has all the best. Good and the best of what? Expensive furniture and absolute silence? He squinted at her. You're getting too involved. And you're getting too involved. Silence filled the space between them. For a moment, Clara saw something different in his eyes, perhaps doubt, perhaps a spark of understanding, but, of course, it was short-lived. I'm not discussing this. You were hired to clean, not to make guesses about how I raise my son. Well, it's not my fault if I'm doing a better job than you. The tension in the air became so thick that Clara could almost cut it with a feather duster. Victor took a deep breath and let it out slowly, before standing up. You're dismissed. Clara blinked. What? You heard me. Get your things and go. She stared at him, expecting him to say it was a joke, but Victor didn't seem the type to make jokes. Her heart squeezed at the thought of Leo. This is a mistake, Victor. The mistake was allowing this situation to get this far. Clara gritted her teeth. You can send me away, but one day you'll realize that money doesn't fill the void in your son's life. She turned and left, feeling a lump in her throat. When she got to the kitchen to collect her things, she found Leo standing in the hallway, holding the toy car. Are you leaving? She knelt down so that she was level with him. I have to go, champ. It was my dad, wasn't it? Clara forced a smile. Hey, you know I'm stubborn. We'll still see each other, okay? But Leo didn't smile. He just nodded, squeezing the trolley tightly before running off to his room. Clara sighed and picked up her bag. You really ruin everything, don't you, Victor? She muttered, before heading out the door. Meanwhile, in the office, Victor was staring out of the window, his fists clenched. So why the hell didn't he feel victorious? Leo was determined. He tried to convince himself that Clara would come back, that her father would change his mind, that everything would be all right. But the days passed, and she didn't show up. So he decided that if Clara couldn't come back, he would go to her. The escape began in the late afternoon, when everyone was busy. He filled a small backpack with a packet of cookies, a flashlight, and the toy car that Clara had praised. He didn't have an exact plan. He just knew he had to find her. Meanwhile, Victor was in the office, finishing a phone meeting. Yes, send the contracts by tomorrow, he said impatiently. He hung up, massaging his temples. Since he had dismissed Clara, the house seemed different. Or maybe it was just him who was different. That's when Marta rushed in. Sir, we haven't found Leo. Victor frowned. What do you mean, haven't found him? He's not in any of the rooms. One of the employees saw the back gate open. Victor's heart raced. Did he run away? Marta hesitated. We think so. Victor felt a wave of panic wash over him. Search the entire estate and notify security. He grabbed his cell phone and dialed Clara's number before he even realized what he was doing. Clara was just finishing organizing the room when the phone rang. If it's a collection, I can tell you I'm not a good investment, she answered without looking at the caller ID. Clara, it's Victor. She froze. Look, the marble boss is speaking. What's going on? It's Leo. He's run away. Her heart stopped for a second. What? He disappeared a few hours ago. We don't know where he went. Clara grabbed the keys before she could even think. I'm going to find him. Clara, She hung up before he could finish. Leo wasn't sure where Clara lived. He remembered a few points along the way, but the streets began to look the same. Cars passed quickly. The sidewalks were full of people. The city, so big, began to seem daunting. He tried to cross a busy street, but halfway there, a car honked loudly and he froze. The headlights blinded him. A braking sound, a scream, and then everything went dark. Victor drove like a madman through the streets. His heart was beating too hard, his chest tight as if the air had disappeared. Then the phone rang. He answered it immediately. Sir, we've found Leo. Victor almost collapsed with relief. Where is he? The pause on the other end of the line made his stomach turn. At the hospital, Victor had never driven so fast in his life. The sound of the tires singing on the asphalt mixed with the whirlwind of thoughts that swirled around in his mind. He arrived at the hospital and practically jumped out of the car, running to the reception desk. Leo Smith, where is he? The receptionist looked at him, startled. He's in the pediatric ward, second floor. Victor shot down the corridor, almost knocking over a nurse on the way. When he reached the door to his room, he stopped for a moment to catch his breath. He took a deep breath. He pushed open the door, and there he was. Leo was lying on the bed, a small bandage on his forehead and one of his arms bandaged. Despite his fright, he seemed fine. Clara was sitting next to him, holding his hand. Victor felt a lump in his throat. Clara looked at him, her eyes blazing with anger. "You took your time." Victor swallowed. "How is he?" "He was lucky. Just a broken arm and a few scratches. But it could have been worse." Leo opened his eyes and, seeing Victor, frowned. "Dad." Victor approached him slowly. "What were you thinking, Leo? You could have really hurt yourself." The boy bit his lip, holding Clara's hand tighter. "I just wanted to bring Clara back." Victor's heart squeezed. Clara took a deep breath and stood up. "I'll get some coffee. You two need to talk." She left, leaving father and son alone. Victor sat down next to Leo and ran his hand through the boy's hair. "You can't just leave like that, son. I was terrified." "You don't understand," Leo muttered. The house was worse off without her. Victor felt a weight on his chest. "I just wanted what was best for you." "No, you wanted what was best for you." His son's direct answer hit him like a punch in the gut. He looked at Leo's small hands holding the blanket and realized how fragile his son looked and how much he had failed as a father. The door opened and Clara returned with a steaming cup of coffee. "Here, boss. 1 coffee. I hope you like it strong, because I made sure to put extra guilt in it." Victor let out a humorless laugh. Clara looked at Leo fondly. "I've got to go, champ, but I promise I'll be back to check on you, okay?" Leo held her hand, desperate. "Don't leave." She hesitated, looking at Victor. He sighed. "Clara, I made a mistake. I was an idiot." Clara crossed her arms. "It's true. Go on." Victor rubbed his face, exhausted. "I need you here." "Do you?" Clara arched an eyebrow. "Or does Leo?" Victor looked at his son and knew the answer. "Both of us." Silence spread through the room. Clara sighed. "I'll think about your case, boss." But Victor saw a small smile at the corner of her lips. And for the first time, he felt he had a second chance. Victor did something he had never done before. He took the day off. Not for a meeting, not to close a contract, but to be by his son's side. Clara still hadn't given a definitive answer about going back, but she continued to visit Leo in hospital, and Victor noticed something curious. His son smiled more when she was around. That morning, Leo was sitting up in bed with one arm in a cast, but with an animated expression. "Dad, do you want to play something with me?" Victor frowned. "Play?" "Yes." Leo picked up a deck of cards that Clara had left with him and started dealing them out. Victor looked at the game as if it were a document in an unknown language. Clara, who was sitting next to him, watched the scene with an amused smile. "Wow, Victor, you look like a robot trying to understand human feelings." He gave her a warning look, but sighed and picked up the cards. "Okay then. How do you play this?" Leo began to explain excitedly. In the middle of his explanation, Victor looked at Clara. "Have you always had such an easy time with children?" She shrugged. "I just know that children need attention. Unlike you, I don't try to educate them with money and silence." Victor opened his mouth to retort, but stopped himself, because deep down, he knew she was right. After Leo fell asleep, Clara and Victor left the room to talk. "I've never been very good at showing feelings," Victor admitted, leaning against the wall in the hallway. "I never would have guessed." He laughed, but then became serious. "I spent my whole life thinking that giving Leo a luxurious house and a guaranteed future was enough. But it wasn't," Clara added. Victor sighed. "No. And I realized that in the worst possible way." Clara crossed her arms, watching him. "So, what are you going to do about it?" He looked at Leo's bedroom door. "I want to learn. I want to be a better father." Clara raised her eyebrows in surprise. "That's by far the most decent thing that's ever come out of your mouth." He laughed lightly. "And I want you to come back, not just as an employee, but as part of our lives." Clara blinked. taking him by surprise as she answered with another question. "Can you cook?" Victor frowned. "What?" "Because if I'm part of our life, as you said, I demand at the very least that someone shares the cooking duties." He smiled. "So that's a yes?" She shrugged. "It's a, let's see if you deserve it." Victor couldn't tell if he was being tested or tortured. But for the first time in his life, he was willing to accept the challenge. The weeks passed, and Victor's house was never the same again. Clara returned, but with a few conditions. Firstly, she was no longer just an employee. Secondly, Victor needed to spend more time with Leo. And thirdly, well, he had to learn how to cook without setting the kitchen on fire. "Is that edible?" Clara asked, poking at a plate of omelettes that Victor had prepared. "I followed the recipe," he retorted. "Dude, it tastes like regret." Leo laughed, and Victor rolled his eyes but smiled. The mansion, which had once seemed like a soulless museum, was now full of life. Laughter echoed through the corridors, and dinner was no longer a silent, formal event. Victor realized that he liked it there. He liked them. One night, after Leo had gone to bed, Clara and Victor sat on the balcony. "I never imagined that my life would change so much," Victor confessed. "That's what happens when you stop acting like an iceberg," he laughed. "You like to insult me, don't you? I call it motivation." Victor was silent for a moment. Then he took a deep breath and reached into his pocket for a small velvet box. Clara's eyes widened. "Don't tell me that." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. "Clara, I'm terrible at a lot of things, but I know that without you, this house becomes cold again, and Leo becomes lonely again." She watched him without interrupting. "I don't just want you to stay," Victor continued. "I want this house to be a home for the three of us. Forever." Clara crossed her arms. "Are you sure? Because I'm not easy to deal with." "Neither am I." She smiled. "Well then, I guess we're even." Leo appeared in the doorway, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "What's going on?" Victor looked at Clara, who took the ring out of the box and put it on her finger. "Your father has finally made a decent decision." Leo smiled. "Does this mean we're going to be a real family?" Victor looked at his son and then at Clara. "We already are." They hugged, and for the first time in his life, Victor realized that he had everything he had ever needed, and it had nothing to do with money.